Thanks for the great introduction, guys, and it's a pleasure to be back. Um, yes, well, last year, 2023, I went back out and played some shows, which were my first shows since 2019. And that was a great experience coming out to Music and Sky and meeting so many of you, but not you, Dr. Bear. That'll have to be reserved for another time. And hopefully I can come and visit that alchemy lab sometime as well. That would be
Yeah,
amazing.
that'd be a blast. Love to see you out here.
So yeah, I did like 4 or 5 shows over summer, which was interesting. After a long break from doing shows, it was interesting coming back with all the changes. As sort of different world, like new eyes, compared to 2019. But and new music, which of course I had a new record come out in December, Nostalgia EP, which was just 3 weeks ago, but it's already last year's music. Um, but so I've been getting that out. But yeah, in the background for the last sort of year and a half, I've been working on a book. Um, Now I've been I've been outspoken about some things over the last few years. When I've needed to say something, I've said it, but I tend to be not very good at persisting with the message. I don't like repeating myself. You know what I mean? I'll just make a big statement, says everything, and then I say it once
Right.
and then I leave it. That tends to be where I'm at. But so I wrote some pieces for the end of COVID, to kind of set the record straight on my views on virology and how because a lot of people are coming to understand that virology is not this like hard science, but it's actually very theoretical and confusing.
Shocking.
Yeah, and so I kind of came to virology quite late in the game, right? Because I was looking into physics and all this other stuff, which is like a lower level, like a smaller scale than virology. But with all the stuff that happened in 2020, I started to see the sort of bigger picture, how virology is sort of built on another theory, which is like evolution, basically, and evolution is built on the theory of heliocentrism and gravity, and these are built on the theories of atomism, and it is like this stack of theories that goes back through history for the last several hundred years. And they're sort of like installed, and then like new theories are built on top of them, and new theories are built on top of them. And I felt like I had this very just clear, almost like superhuman ability to see all of science, see what is theoretical and what is factual. And in my view, I see that's a big problem in the world right now, is people don't know what is theory and what is fact, and so they conflate the two and get them mixed up and so on. Um,
Well, that's why they call the experts PhDs, which stands for piled high and deep.
Piled high and deep, yeah. Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, I've had this PhD for 20 years now, and I haven't really known what to do with it, or like how to use it. And so I don't really use the title all that much. But I guess I've come to realize in the last few years that, of course, credentials are not everything, but they are something, and it's just a morsel, because there's millions of PhDs, right? So it just gives you a morsel of credibility with which to talk about your subject, and at the end of the day, I haven't talked about it a great deal because I've been busy with music and art and various other things. But I've been researching in the background, and I've been getting clearer and clearer about all science, the philosophy of science in general. And my studies in alchemy sort of brought me to a point where I could see where alchemy and science overlap, that's the truth, right? And then everything else that's theoretical, it's like a Venn diagram, everything else that's theoretical just gets pushed out. Um,
I
and uh,
I find conventional studies are important in that they give you a vocabulary so that you do not feel vulnerable when you're out there mixing it up with the experts. And it also serves as a foundation to see where we could contrast between what people believe now and what people knew in past times. So, I found a lot of my background useful as much as it was useless. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, you're right. I mean, yeah, the learning process is useful, the discernment, the analysis, all these things. Like, even though you may be looking at knowledge which later turns out to be of no use to you, you exercised your intellect in the process of kind of learning it and unlearning it. I say sometimes we don't learn anything except how much of a fool we were, right? It's like we just like, man, I didn't learn anything, but I learned that I was a real fool for believing that stuff. But no, so what I mean, I think where alchemy runs into resistance in the modern time, it's all about atomism and the atomic theory, because it really that challenges the theory of ether, or the reality of ether, at the fundamental level. And so what we see is like the reality of ether, fire, earth, air, and water has been replaced or overlaid with an atomic terminology. So all the modern sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, are based on atomic theory, or at least they have atomic terminology when they're talking about things. So, for example, chemists will tell you that they're making molecules, but they're making liquids, right? They're making liquids and salts. You know what I mean? And you know, it's just they'll be like, oh, I just made this molecule, but you know, they got a liquid, they mixed it with another liquid. They're making liquids, you know, but they'll talk about making molecules. And you know, we see this kind of
They're
atomic terminology
mixologists.
in everything. Sorry, sorry,
I'd call them mixologist.
mixologists. Yeah, yeah. So, you know, chemistry is good, and they may do good science by, you know, measuring everything properly and mixing things properly and doing really good practical science. But the theoretical story that they tell you about what's actually happening is based in atomic terminology and atomic jargon, you know, bonds and all this stuff. And I've just found over the years that all that stuff just comes out in the wash. It's no use. It's just like a lingo, a way of thinking about what's going on inside the material. But actually, no one's actually working with atoms and molecules. People work with liquids and solids and gases. You know, all chemistry is liquids, solids, and gases. You know, and heat, of course, fire, light. But the molecules are just these models which kind of encode the properties of the substance in a, you know, a visual representation or so on. And you know, in the periodic table of the elements, for example, there's no elements. There's no fire, there's no water, there's no air, there's no earth. So one of the things I want to get to the bottom of, why are the elements not in the periodic table? Why is hydrogen and oxygen considered an element, but water is not? And you know, what I found there is, I mean, it goes back to the 17th century. Essentially, the definition of the word element was changed from being like a sort of rudimentary and widely available substance like water or fire or earth, to being a purified substance. You know, so the definition of a chemical element is a purified substance. And, you know, hydrogen and oxygen are created from water and electricity. You know, water is not created by hydrogen and oxygen. Now, maybe you can, if I'm wrong about this, you can tell me, but I've been trying to find an example of someone making water by mixing hydrogen and oxygen together. It's a con, you know. So Cavendish was supposed to have done it back in the 1700s. He did an experiment where he put some hydrogen in a bottle and then blew it up. And then there's some drips of water on the glass. He says, well, that's because the hydrogen and oxygen fused together to make the water, but it's just condensation. Like, you can do it now. It's just condensation from the explosion that happened. You know, the rapid change in temperature and pressure creates condensation on the glass. But based on that experiment alone, we're told that hydrogen and oxygen can be put together to make water, but it can't, because water can't be created. And so hydrogen, Cavendish didn't have a name for it. He just called it inflammable air. So Cavendish was responsible for making the word flammable mean the same as inflammable, right? So think how many accidents might have happened in science labs as a result of that, for example. But so he just called it inflammable air, and then someone else, as Lavoisier, came along and named it hydrogen, which means water generator. But here's the thing, it doesn't generate water. Like, you can't make water with it. So hydrogen has been named as this water generating atom. And my theory is I think hydrogen is actually just ether. Hydrogen is ether. They've renamed it into hydrogen, but even in physics and chemistry, they tell you everything's made from hydrogen because it's the smallest atom. So if everything's made from hydrogen, then it's like saying everything's made from ether, right? It's the smallest atom. It rises up the fastest of all the elements or all the gases. Hydrogen goes straight up, you know, into the canopy, and hangs around. And um, I've been trying throughout this process to find any evidence that hydrogen and oxygen can be like smashed
It's
together into water, but
it's all pretty intuitive, really. And it's hard to imagine that some of these brilliant minds just can't sit still for a second and think things out. And it's not that we're trying to demean anybody here; we're just making fun of them. That's all. But the whole concept that there's no ether is pretty fantastical because now you have to believe in something called no thing. And if we're going back to the top of the intelligence hierarchy where the original idea or creativity comes from, how do you create a no thing? I just in the world of simulation, that's a good feat in and of itself. But please go ahead.
Yeah, so it's I think interesting with the hydrogen thing. There's all these videos. You'll see all these videos on YouTube, and the title will be like "creating water from hydrogen and oxygen," and they'll do all this stuff. They'll get the hydrogen, and the oxygen, and then they'll like put the hydrogen, blow it up, and it'll just be this huge explosion. And they'll be like, "Yeah, the water's in the air. The water's all little bits in the air, right?" It's like
It sounds a lot like virology. Take the snot out, add a bunch of gunk to it, throw it in the thing, spin it,
Well,
kill it, and then pull it out and dry it, and then throw some, electronic light beams at it, and then you see particles and go, see, those particles were there. It's just, they're
yeah.
just looking at after effects without any concept of cause.
Mhm.
so can we maybe back up and talk about the elements? Of course, we have, we talk about all the time fire, air, water, and earth, and we can attribute maybe certain from molecular theory kind of concepts associated fire, hydrogen, air, nitrogen, water, oxygen, carbon for earth. But those elements in themselves are products of other attributes that we call hot, cold, dry, and wet. And then those attributes actually form the four elements. And because when you go into those levels of reality, then things really start to become logical.
Yeah, it's like the elements are sort of defined by their properties. They're like
Right.
like it's like water is the wetness of the ether,
Mhm.
and earth is the
Wet and cold is
yeah,
water.
yeah, or like earth is the dryness of the ether, as it were, or the inertia of the ether.
Yeah.
That's the property of earth is inertia. It's actually still, and this gets into the whole spinning earth stuff and everything, but earth the element, not earth the planet, because that doesn't exist. But earth as the element, the dirt under your feet is still. It's it has a property of stillness. It doesn't move unless it's pushed or pulled. Essentially, it resists movement. And all the other elements move. Fire expands and moves out. Air like swirls around and blows, and water flows and everything. But earth just still, it's completely inertial. Has this property of dryness. It also has the property of being fractal. Earth is it has a roughness. You can look at it at any scale, and it'll always look the same. Look at a small rock; it could look like a mountain far away, or a rock close up, or whatever. It's just Earth has this fractal property; it looks the same at all different scales. Um, and of course, I always like to say, Earth is not where we are; it's what we are. It's like no, Earth is not a location, and it's also not an object, but it is what we are made of. We are walking Earth. Of course, we have fire and water, and we breathe air as well. But we're pretty solid.
Yeah, this
And
notion of the earth play.
Say that again, please.
And
I was
being
just gonna
the
say,
go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. Well, I was just saying
No.
to tag on that, just this, the classic notion in alchemy and in the occulted arts that we are the divine activated clay, right? Our bodies are literally clay.
And it's an electrical system. Uh, the levels of the ether, and of course, what we're talking about as far as inertia, it's just the capacitance of the carbon element or the earth element, which receives all the resonance that is further qualified and further densified, we'll say, with every level of ether that it travels through until the final capacitance or resonance collecting happens at the earth level, which gives the appearance of form and function.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And the Earth has the qualities of all the other elements as well. So isn't it
Yep.
right? So Earth is like the product of the action of fire, air, and water, like all together. It's like the offspring of the sort of mixing of the other three elements.
Yep.
Um,
And the
and
human body's a little mini version of that with the same levels of ether. We call it by different things, but it explains exactly everything you need to know about medicine or anything else at the same time, which, of course, why we were taught or indoctrinated into stick figure theory, which means a bunch of magic BBs somehow stuck together to form these little spontaneous creatures that are running around out of thin air.
yes, yeah. So yeah, so this is when I did the talk for the end of COVID, I used the Tower of Babylon as a metaphor, so that kind of spiraling tower with its different levels and so on, as a metaphor for modern science. Um, and at the bottom of it all is the atomic theory. It really, I would say all physical physical theories are based on the theory of the atom. And we see that. It was one of the first things I remember in my physics class, was noticing the similarity between the solar system model and the atomic model. It's incredibly similar. You're like, the sun obviously corresponds to the nucleus. We're told that it's a nuclear system, the sun. And then we have the planets going around it in these orbits, which correspond with the electrons and everything. And, in some ways, the solar system is an atomic model of the sky. It's a model of the sky based on the model of the atom. And so, heliocentrism does come out from atomism, but there's a theory in between those, which is the theory of gravity. Now, gravity, obviously, the solar system theory is based on the theory of gravity, but the theory of gravity is based on the atomic theory because it's ultimately said to be a force is emanating from atoms as a consequence of their nucleus. And so, so when we really want to get to the root of all this, we have to look at the atomic theory, which goes back to Democritus, like ancient Greece and everything. And it's gone through many different flavors and shapes. There's been all kinds of different like atomic theories over the centuries. But in its latest kind of form is like quantum physics, basically what they call quantum physics, or nuclear physics as well, which I study in particle physics, and all these kind of things. They're like the latest flavor of atomism. And so, yeah, I've just been really trying to get to the root of why this is, well, first of all, debunking much of it, trying to get through it. Are people actually working with atoms, and molecules? Is there really a nucleus? Does the atomic nucleus even exist? And all this kind of thing. So really just getting to the bottom of all that and trying to understand, yeah, just all the science that's been built on these assumptions and how it all relates. So that's really what the first part of my book is about, is like breaking all that down. And I'm trying to do it at a philosophical and a general interest level as well, by the way. This is not supposed to be a rebuttal to academic physics and all their because that would be boring, I think, for the majority of readers, right? It's at a philosophical level, I think, a level that people can relate to. And as I say, I have to do this first before I can teach people about alchemy. I have to explain why the science of the modern age is wrong, and where it's wrong.
Can I
So
go
go
ahead?
ahead.
Oh, you go.
No, please. No, you.
I was going to ask because obviously fundamental to countering atomism and the way having a medium, right? What we call the ether. Um, the modern science will make the claim that the Michelson-Morley experiment thoroughly showed that the ether doesn't exist. Do you tackle that at all in your book, and how that relates to also spinning ball and everything? Because there are quite some important takeaways from that experiment if you start to look at it towards the idea of being on a stationary plane versus on a spinning ball.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the Michelson-Morley experiment is an interesting one. I must admit, I didn't go into it in the book, but that doesn't mean I've not gone into it thoroughly in many other ways, And I think the reason maybe I didn't go into that was, well, I don't know. I mean, I've just talked about it a lot. I've read about it a lot. I mean, I could include it now that you mention it. There's so much to say. It is such a big topic.
Yeah.
And I've approached it from many different angles. But yeah, with the Michelson-Morley experiment, I mean, the idea is that, well, of course, they're assuming the Earth is moving when they do the experiment, right? So that's essentially the problem with the Michelson-Morley experiment. You know, the the movement of the Earth. I mean, the way we're told it. I always remember a quote that I've seen around that says, um, what's his name? Nicholas Copernicus set the world in motion, right? Set the world in motion with his theory of the solar system, right? So it's obviously rhetorical, because one man is not going to set the world in motion by his declaration. It's ridiculous. But we're expected to believe that actually the Earth was spinning the whole time, right? And that people prior to the 15th century were so primitive, and they were just lacking understanding of gravity. Didn't have the theory of gravity. They didn't have heliocentrism, and they were too primitive and naive to realize that they're spinning on a ball through space, and that's what we're supposed to believe. But actually, what happened with Copernicus, you know, actually all that changed was the opinion of the clergyman, right? Because it was a Catholic, it was a Catholic doctrine, and it was heretical for like 200 years or something. And then eventually they're like, you know what? It's all right. It's all right. Let's start teaching it. And now we're like, some 150 years or so into this heliocentric theory being taught in schools all over the world. And all because of this Copernicus guy came up with this theory, and the clergyman decided it was believable, and they were going to teach it and everything. But, the Earth didn't start spinning. You know, it's kind of the way it's taught to us. It was like long ago, it was like stationary, and then a guy came up with a theory, and then the world started spinning, and now we all live on this spinning world. But actually, either way of looking at it is ridiculous, because there's no spin. And you talk to pilots, about it. It's like literally any pilot with a basic knowledge of classical mechanics knows fine well they could never land on a spinning ball. I mean, it's just it's ridiculous to even think about landing an airplane on a spinning ball. The forces involved would just throw it right off. I mean, even walking on the outside of a spinning ball, life on the outside of a spinning ball is just impossible. And I think loads of people have shown this to be the case. And the only way you can sort of make it work is with this magic sauce called gravity, which just fixes everything and stops us getting, hurled out into space.
Yeah, I did flight training myself, getting a pilot's license, and I don't remember them telling me to anticipate the spin when I was landing or taking off. I also, when I was up at high altitudes, don't remember seeing curvature, but Maybe I was just missing something.
Yeah. I mean, I started looking into the flat Earth stuff back in like 2015, 2016, and obviously I reacted to it the same way as everyone else does at first. You're just like, wow, that's crazy. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, well, I don't really know. I mean, I've never seen the globe. I've seen pictures, but I've never seen, I've never actually seen evidence of it. And I don't, we don't feel like we're spinning. I mean, even mainstream physicists will tell you there's actually no way. People like Brian Cox and that, they'll tell you that there's no way to test whether or not you're actually moving. There's no way for us to know. It's only by theory that we know that we're moving, right? So they'll even tell you there's no way that you can physically prove it. Um, so yeah, with the flat Earth stuff, I mean, you have to kind of come into a position of neutrality, which I had no problem doing. I was just like, okay, I'm going to be neutral now, and then I'm going to look at the evidence for and against the spinning ball Earth, and I did. And then, so of course, what happens? You start pouring through all the evidence, and you eventually realize that you've been completely duped, and like the penny just drops, and for me, this happened back in 2016. Um, and it's like they say that no one ever goes back, right? There's no once you know that you're not on a spinning ball, no one ever goes back to believing that they are on a spinning ball. I mean, why? Yeah, why would you?
Yeah.
It's
Well, the flat Earth is another synthesized pejorative, like conspiracy theorist. And those of us that have investigated deeply and found that the narrative is largely lies. I mean, that's all you need to know. I don't know what shape the Earth is. I've never seen it. I do know for a fact that they're telling a bunch of whoppers. So that's a good starting point, I think, just for any kind of legitimate investigation. We're not making claims. We can just prove that other people are lying. And then, of course, the next question is, who are these people and why are they lying to us?
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's that whole side of it as well. So, I mean, at first I thought, well, everyone means well, right? That's your first is that everyone means well. They're all just doing their best, trying to come up with theories to explain the world and all that kind of stuff. But in the light of learning alchemy, once I started to understand alchemy and see how that works and see how that's the true science, then uh, the theoretical science started to look a bit more sinister. And the deeper I got into, I mean, there's obviously people who are just in it for, they're just learning, they're just trying to figure things out. But at the top level, it does seem quite sinister. And then, of course, with the whole the C word that happened in 2020, which was just so unbelievably sinister. I think we're all still trying to figure out like how the world is going to like respond to this, but it's incredibly sinister. And yeah, and just seeing how they use the theories and the maths and the modeling and the coercion and just the deception. Oh, it was it was a real eye opener, and I think for me it just brought it all together. All the conspiracies, like a lot of people said that, right? It's like until 2020, conspiracy research was just like this curiosity on the internet. In 2020, you're like, holy shit, it's happening. It's like it's all happening. Yeah. So it's been a crazy few years, but anyway, yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
It's been, and part two is already building to be quite a hoot, and that's coming soon here. So they're already preparing us for that. But